テレ東ワールドポリティクス豊島晋作です。今回は特別企画をお届けします。もし将来中国が台湾に軍事侵攻した場合、日本はどう備えていくのか、日本は台湾に近い南西諸島を守れるのか、そこで生まれる葛藤とは何か、アメリカは台湾を本当に守るのか。これまでワールドポリティクスでは大統領補佐官、アメリカの大統領補佐官を務めたマクマスター将軍ですとか、マイケル・グリーン氏など元アメリカ政府の高官から話を聞いてきましたけれども、今回はですね、日本の自衛隊の訓練を受けたアメリカの著名なジャーナリストに話を聞いていきます。そこから日米同盟のリアルな視点について、海外との特別コラボレーション企画としてお届けしていきます。今回コラボレーションする相手は YouTube チャンネル登録者数526万人を超える驚異的なですね、視聴者を抱えるアメリカの独立系ジャーナリストジョニー・ハリスさんです。ハリスさんの動画はどれも数百万回から時には1000万回以上も再生されていまして、英語圏では最も影響力のある YouTuber ジャーナリストの一人です。アメリカの優れたテレビ番組などを表彰するエミー賞の受賞歴もあります。今回そのハリスさんからテレ東ワールドポリティクスがコラボレーションのオファーをいただきまして、今回ですねこの動画を作っているという状況です。そのハリスさんは今回陸上自衛隊第15旅団の司令部があり、第51普通科連隊などが所属する沖縄の那覇駐屯地で自衛隊の訓練に実際に参加して、日本の国防安全保障環境の変化について動画にまとめています。動画では日本版海兵隊とも呼ばれる陸上自衛隊の水陸機動団や奄美大島の新しい駐屯地なども取材しています。水陸機動団というのは2018年に発足した比較的新しい部隊で、日本の離島が敵対勢力から軍事侵攻を受けた場合、そして占領された場合にそれを奪還することなどを任務とする部隊です。離島奪還作戦というのは、敵がいる中でその前で上陸していくわけですから、非常にですね、困難で危険を伴う任務でもあります。アメリカの海兵隊などとも頻繁に共同訓練を行う自衛隊のエリート部隊とも見られています。ハリスさんは動画でですね、この沖縄戦の記憶なども丁寧にたどりながら、南西諸島に住む人々の複雑な思いについても伝えています。ある意味でバランスの取れたですね、動画になっているというのが印象です。島の人々からしますと、仮に自衛隊が来れば、日本の領土としては守られるという一面がある一方で、やはり軍事目標になって敵から攻撃されるというリスクがある点など、現地の方々の様々な思い、複雑な思いなども多角的に取材した動画になっています。このジョニー・ハリスさんの動画のリンクについては概要欄に貼っていますので、先にそちらをご覧になりたいという方は、ぜひ先にそちらをですね、見てください。概要欄にリンク貼っております。この動画はですね、日本語版の吹き替えや字幕もついていますので、私たち日本人も気軽に見ることができる動画になっています。まさにアメリカや世界から見れば、今の日本がどう見えるのか、中国の軍事的な脅威の高まりでですね、国防安全保障上の困難に直面する日本、そして極東アジアというのがどう見えるのか、アメリカの側から、世界の側からどう見えるのかというのが分かる内容にもなっています。なお、ハリスさんには中国が軍事侵攻した場合、台湾に軍事侵攻した場合ですね、アメリカが本当に台湾を守るのかどうか、率直なところどう思うかについても聞いています。ハリスさんの動画を見ていただく前の前提知識ベースでですね、いくつか基本的な情報をまずお伝えしておきますと、中国は21世紀に入りまして、世界中のどの国よりも速いスピードで軍備の増強を進めていまして、これが日本の脅威にもなっているわけです。2023年の日本の防衛白書ベースで見てみますと、中国海軍が当初から重視した近代的なですね、潜水艦の数というのは右肩上がりとなっていまして、現在57隻あるいはそれ以上となっていて、日本の海上自衛隊が保有する潜水艦の数22隻をはるかに上回る、2倍を大きく上回る状況となっています。水上艦艇の数も近代的な駆逐艦、フリゲートの数などもご覧のように急激にですね、増大していまして、現在2001年と比べると 5.9 倍の88隻となっていまして、こちらも同じく日本の海上自衛隊が保有する護衛艦の数50隻を大きく上回っています。 そして航空戦力はですね、さらに驚異的に伸びていまして、第4、第5世代戦闘機の数というのは2001年と比べても 16.7 倍の1500機にまで増強されています。一体何のためにこれほどですね、急激な軍拡をしているのかということなんですけれども、まずやはり世界最強のアメリカ軍に追いつくため、そして台湾を制圧するために十分な軍事力を持つという狙いがあると見られています。そしてですね、ハリスさんの動画にもあるんですが、アメリカから見た現在の日本というのも、こうした中国の軍事力の増強に対応するために、前例のないほどですね、防衛費の増額を行っていまして、軍事力の増強を強めています。2024年度の日本の防衛費は7兆9496億円で、前年度から1兆円以上増えて過去最高となっています。2023年度は6兆円台、6兆8000億円台、そして2022年度は5兆4000億円でしたので、日本の防衛費というのはこのところ1兆円をですね、大きく増えるペースでどんどん増額されているという状況です。特に顕著なのが弾薬のですね、整備費ですね。こちらは令和5年ベースでの数字なんですけれども、8283億円ということで、前年の2480億円に比べて3倍以上とですね、非常に大きな増額がされています。この弾薬というのは、小銃のための銃弾から戦車の砲弾、戦闘機や艦艇がですね、使用するミサイル、爆弾、魚雷、地雷、機雷などを指しています。この国の予算司る財務省がですね、ここまでの増額を認めたというのは、やはりウクライナ戦争が全ての状況を変えたから、前提を変えたからですね。やはりウクライナ戦争を見てみますと、戦争には弾薬を相当な量、かなりの量を消費するということが分かったわけです。ですので、弾薬が、ウクライナもそうです、特にそうですが、弾薬が圧倒的に足りなくなっているという状況を見て、日本もそれに備えなければいけないというふうに政府としても認識が変わったものと見られています。もともと自衛隊というのはですね、弾薬に十分な予算が当てられていなかったともいうふうにも言われています。訓練でも弾薬がですね、十分の量ないので、そんなにたくさん撃てないですとか、そういった問題もあったようですし、必要な場所にですね、必要な量をすぐに届けられることができるのかという疑念もありました。弾薬庫からですね、こう運んでいくロジスティックスの問題ですね。海上自衛隊ですと、舞鶴の艦艇が必要な弾薬を佐世保からですね、陸路で輸送して対応するケースもあったということなんですね。このため自衛隊は戦争にもしなれば弾薬やミサイルというのは数日か1週間程度しか持たないのではないかというふうにも言われていました。こうした継戦能力、戦争を継続する能力についてもやはり問題意識が大きくなってリアルに国の予算、防衛費としても反映されたという格好になっています。このほか、武器のための予算、防衛装備品の予算もですね、大幅に増額されています。もっともですね、燃料予算などの問題もありますので、まだまだ課題は多いのではないかというふうにも見られています。なお、様々な意見や、見方はあると思いますけれども、こうした自衛隊の能力向上というのは、アメリカ軍との連携によって本領を発揮するというふうにも見られているわけです。特に中国の台湾への軍事侵攻に際しましては、台湾、アメリカ、日本の連合軍が戦う、いわゆる台湾戦争においてそれは顕著だというふうにも考えられています。これはいろんな法的な制約があるわけですが、場合によっては特定の条件の下では日本もアメリカ軍、台湾軍と一緒に戦う可能性というのが十分に想定されてくるわけです。アメリカの CSIS 戦略国際問題研究所が2023年に実施したウォーゲーム、これ戦争のシミュレーションにおいてはアメリカ軍、台湾軍、そして自衛隊の連合軍が複数の多くのシナリオにおいて中国人民解放軍を撃退して台湾の防衛に成功するという結果になっています。すべてではないんですが、多くのシナリオによってそうなっています。この台湾防衛作戦に関しましては、特に日本の米軍基地、そして自衛隊が大きな役割を果たすという一つの結論が導かれています。今回ですね、ハリスさんとの対談、この後お伝えするわけなんですけれども、こうした日米同盟は本当に機能するのかどうか、どういうふうにジャーナリストの視点から見ているのかについて、ある種日米同盟のリアリティについてもですね、ハリスさんには直接聞いています。仮にですね、日本が攻撃されていない状態などであれば、中国との戦闘においては、自衛隊はアメリカ軍の後方支援、比較的ですね、戦場から遠い後方からの支援になる可能性もあるわけなんですけれども、これは同じ日本人として見ますと、やはり自衛隊員の方々の無事を願うという観点からはですね、やはり戦場から離れて、自衛隊には犠牲は出てほしくないというようなところが、率直的な感情的な部分としてはあるわけなんですが、私も個人的にはそう思うわけなんですけれども、ただこうした考え方が果たして現実的な考え方なのか、 また日米同盟にどういった影響を与えるのかというのは全く別の問題で存在しています。もしアメリカ兵がですね、アメリカの母国から遠く離れた国の台湾近海の戦場でですね、命を落とし、死傷者を出してですね、一方で日本、もっと地理的に台湾に近いわけですけれども、その自衛隊員が、かなり無事になる、犠牲が少ないという状況に対して、アメリカの世論がそれを事実として見たときに、どういうふうに反応が予想されるのか、そういったリアルな目線などについても、ハリスさんには今回聞いています。アメリカ兵の犠牲が出ているのに、自衛隊の犠牲が少ないという場合ですね、これはアメリカ世論がどう受け止めるのかという視点ですね。ということで、少し前置きが長くなりましたけれども、ここからは日米同盟の現場、特に自衛隊の現場をアメリカ人の目線で見て、動画にしたジョニー・ハリスさんへのインタビューをご覧いただければと思います。なお、私のですね、不正確で下手な英語はどうかご容赦いただければと思います。字幕の趣旨の通りだというふうにご理解いただければ幸いです。では、ハリスさんへのインタビューをご覧ください。Hi, Johnny. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm excited to be here talking to you guys.
Thank you. What did you feel when you experienced the JSDF training in Japan?
First off, it was very difficult. I got to put on full gear and uniform and got to participate in real training exercises with the JSSDF, and it was a very difficult process. It was also very enlightening. I learned a lot. I saw a lot, and I got to feel a lot of the tension and the anxiety and the fear, but also the camaraderie and the patriotism that exists within the Japanese military, and some of that anticipation that everyone's feeling as things become a little bit more tense in the region.
Have you ever experienced the U.S. military training in your mainland, in your homeland?
A little bit, yeah. I've been around military bases, and I worked in a military base for a little bit, but I never did full-on training. But yes, I've been exposed to the culture of the U.S. military.
I see. What can you say when you compare with those trainings, the U.S. military and the JSDF training, and the culture-wise?
I would have to say that the JSDF were kinder, a little bit more kinder and more polite. It's not nothing to say bad about American military, but there's just a little bit more confidence and kind of feeling of it's more kind of rude and intense. Whereas I felt like at the JSDF base, everyone was so kind and nice, even though we were working hard. Everyone was respectful, and that was a little bit different than what I'm used to.
I see. Did JSDF officials tell you about the restrictions of their behavior, code of conduct, and restrictions over due to the constitutions and the legal frameworks?
Yeah, so I learned a little bit about how there is so many restrictions from the Constitution on the growth of the military. And that, of course, comes from the end of World War II and the time when the U.S. occupied Japan and helped them rewrite a constitution with no strong military. What I have noticed is that over time, especially in the last 10 years, Japan has shown a willingness to be flexible with these restrictions and show that even though they have, for the last 80 years almost, had almost no real offensive military, that the times are changing and the U.S. is leaning on them to be a security partner who can protect themselves. And they know that, and they know that they have to be ready and that they have to build a deterrent against any kind of aggression in the region. And so I see that there are those restrictions, legal and constitutional, but I think that there's an appetite among the Japanese people and Japanese politicians to make sure that the security of the country comes first, and that some of these old legal frameworks are going to have to change because of today's situation.
Yeah, exactly. Very interesting. And what messages do you want to deliver to the viewers through this video?
Well, there are two different audiences I'm thinking here. I'm thinking about the global audience, you know, people in the United States and all around the world. And then I'm thinking about the audience in Japan. And those are two different audiences for me. One of my big motives and efforts is I want this story to reach Japanese viewers, because it is a story that recognizes the JSSDF and all of the work that they're doing, but then it also recognizes the complicated relationship that Japan has with a growing military. Because last time that happened, it led to some of the most horrific suffering of the Japanese people. And that memory is still very present for a lot of Japanese people, especially down in the southwestern islands. And so I wanted to create a discussion around the need for security, but the fear and the trauma that is associated with militarization. I think it's an important discussion that needs to happen. And I think that the voices of the Japanese people down in the southwestern islands, those voices need to be heard. And then for the rest of the world, I wanted people to see what is happening here in this region and understand that this is something that we read about in the newspaper, but for the people living here, for the soldiers and for the civilians, this is a real thing that they're thinking about every day. And it's very real for them. It's their daily life. It's their islands. It's their, it's their security. Yeah. And I want people to see that in both a geopolitical lens, but also in a human lens. And that was sort of my message from the video.
I see. And actually, you talked to the officials of the amphibious task force and then the coastline. And I guess they never said that, but their first enemy is actually China.
Yes,
People's Baptist
and
Army.
They did tell me that pretty explicitly, and have told me that, and they use vague terms like, the security situation and environment has gotten more severe. They'll use these vague terms, but they're very clearly worried about a more aggressive China that is more and more comfortable using the ocean and using the sea as a way to project power. And Japan is a country of 4,000 or 14,000 islands. It is an island country. China is getting really good at creating, invading, bullying islands, and Japan and the amphibious task force is thinking a lot about how they're going to make it feel like a bad idea to ever invade a Japanese island. And that's why they have all these new techniques and units and troops that they do exercises on that I covered in the video, that show that Japan now has these capabilities. They have surface-to-air missiles and surface-to-ship missiles and all these new missiles on these islands as well. That is basically aimed directly at making sure China knows that Japan is ready.
Yeah. And also they are ready they have to be ready for the situation when the China invades Taiwan. At the same time, the China is going to invade the Japanese islands. That is why the amphibious task force is ready for. And my key question is, when the China invades Taiwan, is United States military is to protect Taiwan? Do you think they're going to protect Taiwan? Or they want to just...
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I think they probably will in some form. And I don't know what form that takes. But I know that US lawmakers and leaders need China to believe that they will protect. And I think that that's a very, very important mental calculation that they're making. I do think that the United States will do something severe to punish China and prevent any kind of real incursion into Taiwan. But I also don't think that the invasion of Taiwan is too near. I think China will show more aggressive gray area warfare in the meantime, blockades and other kind of warfare that isn't a full invasion but still creates pain and creates discomfort for Taiwan and the global economy. But I don't think we're there yet. And I think that things could change and we could get to a point where this escalation could start to go very quickly. And we're not there yet, but I know how quickly these things can change. Mm-hmm. And the commanders I talked to, they mention Ukraine, and they say Ukraine is an example that this kind of thing can happen
Yeah.
very quickly. So
Yeah.
even though it's not going to happen right now, everything could change in 5 years or 2 years, and that's what they're preparing for. When that happens, there'll be a whole other set of calculations that the U.S. will have to make, and I think they will come to their rescue. I just don't know how exactly.
Yeah, it's difficult to see the calculations and the equation, and if the U.S. government decide to defend Taiwan, maybe the JSDF will participate in joint military operations. But due to the legal restrictions you mentioned before, that there will be a situation, or many situations, or some situation in which the American soldiers will be on the front lines in the fight against China. But on the other hand, the JSDF soldiers stays behind. And in that case, the American public may turn against Japanese, seeing a blood of American soldiers is spilled in war far from United States mainland. And while the blood of Japanese soldiers whose land is closer to the battlefield is hardly spilled. What is your take on this?
I think that could be a real problem. The United States has been in a lot of wars, even in my lifetime, in faraway places, fighting, for other people, when really it was to protect American interests. But I remember growing up and seeing the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and there was a major outcry from the public saying, why are we fighting these wars that are so expensive, that are far away, and our soldiers are on the front lines? That's, these are senseless wars. I do think that this would be a different conflict because China represents a power that could replace the United States as the global superpower. And if China gets to the point where they feel emboldened and powerful enough that they would risk a head-to-head fight with the United States, then that would be a real existential problem for the United States. And I believe that we would probably have all kinds of rhetoric here at home calling for, the protection of the world order and all of those things that happens when war comes around. So yes, I do believe that could be a problem, but I think that the United States is looking at China, and it is a conflict between those two. Everyone else is kind of caught in the middle and caught in the crosshairs of that war. And I think that the American public would be understanding. Though, as I mentioned, I do think that Japan is getting more and more bold with their military expansion. I mean, almost doubling their defense spending in such a short time, superseding a lot of these legal frameworks around the Constitution, around 1% of GDP. All of these ratcheting up of militarization that is against Article 9 and against some of the Constitution stuff, but they're able to make it work, and they're kind of justifying it, and no one is pushing back because they all know they need to do it. And I think that some similar thing would happen in a situation where China invades Taiwan or threatens the southwestern islands in that way.
Yeah, it's well explained that when when Japanese government explains the U.S.-Japan alliance, they often mention the shield and the sphere. The kind of example, the shield, the JSDF as a shield, and the spear, the U.S. armed forces will kind of sphere when they fight together. And do you think this concept is difficult to understand for the American public?
I think it's made sense for the last 70, 80 years. Nice. It's made sense. And it has allowed the United States to feel like the atrocities of World War II were, rectified and justified, because now there's this great friendship. The United States is able to have this permanent presence in Japan, and there's this shield and spear relationship that allows the U.S. to pursue its security interests in Korea and Vietnam and all throughout the region. Yeah. And yet, I think it's changing now, where I think it's Japan that feels like they need to have their own spear.
Nice.
I think Japan is starting to feel like, especially in a world where the United States potentially starts to take a back seat to global leadership, which under a potential Trump administration is something that very much could happen and already has started to happen in Europe with a potential Trump administration and what he demonstrated when he was in power. So I think if Trump comes back into the White House, you'll see an America that doesn't give security guarantees to anyone unless it directly serves America right now. And that could be a real problem for this calculus of deterrence, where you have to promise you're going to show up. Trump doesn't promise anything to anyone, and that will embolden Russia, and it could embolden China. And so I think Japan and the Philippines, everyone in the region says we need our own spear. We need to be ready. And yes, we'll rely on the United States, but we can't trust them 100% because of the behavior of the Trump administration.
It's very interesting. Yeah. Personally, I guess whether the U.S. public can support the war to defend Taiwan depends on how the war begins, I guess. So looking back to the history, when the U.S. ship sank, the U.S. public opinion got very furious, got very angry. Then when we look back the history, Maine, and the ship Maine was exploded, and the American public got very angry, and went into war with Spain, and the luxury cruiser Lusitania, they were sunk by the U-boat by the German, and the American public got really furious, and they go to the World War I, and the warship Arizona was sunk due to the Pearl Harbor attack. The American public got really angry, and actually the U.S. ship or the U.S. citizen was killed on the ship, on board. And if China is going to attack the U.S. vessel or the fleet, and do you think my understanding is correct?
No, I think that's absolutely correct. That any country will feel motivated to go to war if they feel like they need to seek revenge. And you're seeing this right now in Israel. Israel will go to war endlessly because of revenge. That is a powerful, powerful motivator. But you know what else is really motivating, especially for the American people, I've noticed in the last 2 years, is defending some kind of freedom, some kind of ideal of democracy and freedom. Here in the United States, when you drive around a neighborhood, for the last 2 years, you see Ukrainian flags on people's mailboxes. People put Ukrainian flags in their windows, and they light them up at night. And that has been so interesting to me, to see that this place that's far away, that most people didn't even know. Americans don't know a lot about geography, so it's like they didn't even know where Ukraine is. And now suddenly everyone cares about Ukraine, and everyone has a Ukrainian flag. It's because and I think a lot of countries are like this, but I think the United States is very willing to go defend some kind of freedom. I think that's what brought us into, Europe during World War II. And I think that the American people would rally around the David and Goliath sort of spectacle of China versus trying to swallow this democracy called Taiwan, where we get all our microchips. Yes. And I think that it would have a similar effect. Now, the problem with that is that it wears off pretty easily. What's happened with our situation in Ukraine is after 2 years, suddenly American people and lawmakers are over it, and they're like, all right, we've moved on. We care about Israel now. And so it doesn't have the same endurance, but I do believe that if Ukraine was invaded, we as a country would rally to support any kind of defense of the country. I don't know what costs we'd be willing to pay, but I think it would strike a nerve not too much differently than, the Maine or, Pearl Harbor.
I see. You mentioned the impact of the presidential election of this year about security and the deterrence in the Southeast Asia. And if the Trump go back to the White House, as I learned what you said, and if the President Biden is selected, he's saying that we're going to defend Taiwan. The U.S. is committed to defend Taiwan. However, how do you see the situation, the lawmakers and the senator and the House of Representatives? There are conservative, generally speaking, the conservative Republicans is very eager to defend freedom and democracy. They used to be, but now the situation is changing in the U.S. Parliament. How do you see it? absolutely, it depends on who will be the president.
Yeah, I think it'll be the president that will make the difference, because Trump is a strange. He's not. He doesn't fit into a box. He is anti being global leadership because he doesn't love making alliances that are built off of trust. He is kind of a deal maker who wants to only make deals that will directly serve him. And so, whereas most American lawmakers and previous presidents from both parties are able to unify around protecting America and its allies, and that's a commitment to NATO, that's a commitment to the security agreements in the Pacific, and Trump is able to just sort of throw all of that out. Now, people will follow Trump. That's the thing, is if he's at the top, all of these Republicans will follow him and they'll suddenly get on board. But if he's not at the top, these Republicans won't just suddenly jump on board with being anti-NATO, though they've shown a little bit of that with Ukraine. But I think if he's not in the White House, there'll be a much more likely air of support for deterrence and coming to Taiwan's rescue.
I see. Thank you very much, Johnny-san. Thank you very much for sharing your time. It's a very interesting interview for you. And maybe I'll make it start argument, start discussions about the upcoming risks and peace and security issues for Japan. Thank you very much indeed.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. ということでしたけれども、日米同盟について政府関係者でもない、あるいは学者でもない目線、ある意味市民の目線、アメリカ国民としての目線がわかる、ある意味率直なリアルなインタビューだったというふうに思います。このジョニー・ハリスさんの動画、スリッ機動団を取材したり、南西諸島を取材した動画というのはすでに YouTube で公開されていまして、多く視聴されているようです。こちら日本語でもわかるようになっています。ナレーション日本語でもついているようですので、概要欄にリンクを貼っていますので、ぜひご覧いただければと思います。また、ハリスさんはですね、アメリカはいかにして日本を追い詰めたのかという日米開戦について解説する動画もですね、上げていますので、こちらアメリカの目線にしては割となんかフェアな動画のような印象も受けるんですけれども、そういった動画も上がっていますので、そちらもご覧いただければというふうに思います。こちらも概要欄にリンクを貼っています。そして恐縮ですけれども、ここは完全に最後私の宣伝です。私が書いた本、日本人にどうしても伝えたい教養としての国際政治が7月20日に発売となります。すでに Amazon でも予約できますので、ぜひチェックいただければと思います。最近は経済の話題と同時に、あるいは経済の話題よりもですね、国際政治に関する話題がニュースを賑わせることが多くなっています。そこで最低限知っておくべき教養のような部分をお伝え、わかりやすく書いた内容です。ということで宣伝で大変失礼いたしました。ということで、テレ東ワールドポリティクス長い動画ここまでご覧いただきありがとうございました。